Hello, I'm Leonard Leff, and in case you didn't know, sabotage means, well, you do know. The essence of sabotage is surprise, and here's one. The movie opens not with the studio logo or the names of the stars, but with the dictionary. Maybe Hitchcock wants us to contrast what the dictionary itself represents, order, with what the word sabotage represents, disorder. Or maybe Hitchcock, who by this time was already the first word in Suspense, merely wants us to wonder. Whatever the case, the young English director appropriately enough gets a screen credit all to himself. Screenwriter Charles Bennett, who must share the screen with many others, once said that Hitchcock had, quote, a monstrous ego that matched his appetite. Bennett nonetheless liked Hitchcock, and Sabotage was one of their best collaborations. The actors helped make it so, though some of the best ones go unnamed here. More on them later. Now, the biggest surprise in the credits. Disney, Hitchcock, and hardly a degree of separation. Who knew, or could have guessed, that these two giants of cinema, the producers of Fantasia and Frenzy, were once bedfellows? The music here seems more frenetic than the traffic, though Hitchcock uses music sparingly throughout the picture. For Verloc's death, he uses no music at all. Here, though, he wants to stress the point that Plowthorpe Road, the setting of most of the action, can barely hold the crush of people who throng the thoroughfare and sidewalks. Hitchcock preferred to tell stories in pictures, and in Sabotage, he carefully cut together numerous images to construct two great sequences at the end of the movie. Here, meanwhile, he uses an eye-catching, razor-sharp composition that complements the spare telegraphic language of the investigators. Sabotage is not a whodunit. We see whodunit, the Viennese actor Oscar Homolka, in one of his best film roles. Hitchcock never wanted to be known as a director of mere whodunits, but the critics now group Sabotage with the so-called thriller sextet, 6 films that the director made beginning in 1935 with The 39 Steps and ending in 1939 with The Lady Vanishes. Our main setting, an independent theater in the apparently fictitious Plowthorpe Road. Later on, we will learn that a corporation has taken over the green grocery next door. Could the Bijou be next? It obviously gets foot traffic, and if it operates in the red, as apparently it does, the reason may be the management, as again, later we will learn. Meet Detective Sergeant Ted Spencer. Hitchcock had wanted Robert Donat, who starred in The 39 Steps. Instead, he got John Loder, who here teases Sylvia Sidney about calling the blackout, quote, an act of providence.
But I had a hell of a time trying to eat my egg on toast in the dark. Half of it's in my ear now. They want their money back.
What does the cashier say? She had a, quote, hell of a time? Speak of the devil, what Winnie Verloc called an act of providence was in truth an act of her husband and his associates. More to the point, their activities will cause Ted to spy on Verloc, which will cause Verloc to confine himself to his house, which will cause Stevie to cross London with a bomb under his arms. Providence? Whoever watches over and guides the events in London seems more like Satan, as the box office cashier has just hinted. While the fastidious Mr. Verloc washes the evidence of explosives from his hands, a word about the English film industry. In 1936, Gaumont British and other studios were prone to serious financial contractions. They had hired American stars, as well as American directors and cinematographers, in order to increase British film revenues, especially abroad. But these Hollywood imports sometimes caused resentment among their British counterparts. Worse, Their pictures were often box office disappointments. The censors may have let the cashier say hell, but they could not have allowed a double bed. Here, though, that single bed conveys a truth about the Verloc's marriage. Verloc cares for Winnie, his wife, cares for her in several senses of the word. But they have reached an understanding which the two beds represent. In the novel that Sabotage was based on, by Joseph Conrad, Verloc operates a store that stocks condoms and erotic books and pictures. Nice shot here, by the way. That rocking chair motion suggests more energy than Verloc generally shows. Hitchcock liked to experiment, especially when a lighting effect or camera movement, as there, could make an extraordinary moment of exposition more dynamic. Complex setups, though, took time, and time took money, not always abundant in England.
Yes, and what about the one you put your feet?
Hitchcock sets much of Sabotage in narrow corridors, dusty back rooms, and darkened surroundings. This dark transitional area separates the public from the private lives of the Verlocs. Spatially, it reminds us of Winnie, who, in various ways, will soon find herself betwixt and between. Sabotage lacks the insouciance of the 39 Steps and the tender romance of Young and Innocent. Moreover, Sabotage is literally darker than these and other pictures in the thriller sextet. Sabotage begins with a blackout and ends at night. In between, Winnie looks despondent or apprehensive, while her husband ekes out a living from two businesses that operate in the dark, cinema and terrorism. Winnie takes the cinema business seriously and worries that Verloc does not. When, for example, his neighbor, the greengrocer, teases him about showing movies that are a bit too hot, does the greengrocer realize that Verloc could probably not pass a test on what films his theater shows? Unlike his cook, his wife, his brother-in-law Stevie, or Ted, Verloc pays no attention to the screen when he comes and goes. Ted, who will gradually replace Verloc in other ways, takes over for him and shows himself very clever for a police officer in a Hitchcock film. His speech resembles the stem winder that Robert Donat gives in the 39 Steps. Ted's speech may even have been written for Donat before Scottish actor John Loder joined the cast. Donat had an incredible lightness of being that he wore like a custom suit. Loder nonetheless perseveres, and with enough polish to keep Winnie's attention. These characters have not met cute, as other 1930s characters do, but they will trade barbs with one another. The lines, however, are the line readings, never quite sing. That's an opinion, of course, but if true, the absence of fizz adds to the movie's darkness. Let's take a listen.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to get your money back.
Don't give in now. I'll stand by you.
I prefer you to go and stand by your Apple store. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been speaking to Mr. Verloc, and since you're all regular patrons and good friends, he's going to let you have your money back.
There'll be no money back, I tell you. Go on, get off.
Please, don't pay any attention to him.
I tell you, you're crazy. I had it all fixed.
Will you mind your own business?
Of all the obstinate people...
If you don't go away, I'll call the police.
Nice moment for John Loder, that leprechaun look. Behind the scenes on Sabotage was its producer, Michael Balkin. Balkin had taste and talent. Like Hitchcock, he also had ambition. From early in his career, he strove to make pictures, like Sabotage, for an international audience, in particular, an American audience. As one of his associates said, Mick would be inclined to make pictures that his contract directors, Hitchcock included, wanted to make. Well, in fact, when Balkin announced his slate of pictures for the year, one of the categories was Hitchcock films. The original Verloc in Joseph Conrad's novel called The Secret Agent had been married to Winnie for almost 10 years. He had boorish manners and fewer pangs of conscience than his Hitchcock counterpart. Meanwhile, Winnie asked no questions about her husband's affairs, and he in turn supported both her and her kid brother, who in the Conrad novel was emotionally stunted. since this Verloc works both as an agent for the terrorist and as an informer for the police, he feels squeezed. One fatal day, he uses his brother-in-law as his tool.
Please tell Mrs. Verloc, miss. Oh, there you are, ma'am. I've got to hurry home now.
Ah, Mrs. Jones, the cook, a familiar kind of character in Hitchcock. Others in Sabotage were the customer who returns the songbird to the pet store and the irate movie-going couple who demands its money back. The take-charge demeanor of these people reminds us of the toughness that the British would show during the Blitz. Well, not everyone was suited for the Blitz, but Hitchcock uses scenes like these to build interest and sympathy for Stevie, played by Desmond Tester. Tester had had success as a child actor on stage, then several screen roles before Stevie. None was noteworthy, and all were fatal. In Midshipman Easy in 1935, he was beaten to death. In Two to Rose in 1936, he was executed. With his open face and ready demeanor, he was perfect for Stevie, even if Hitchcock gave him a hard time on the set. He was 17 and looked younger when he made Sabotage, and despite his experience in the theater, he was not so old that he could not be embarrassed. "Desmond Testicle to the set," Hitchcock would shout. "Desmond Testicle to the set." Tester blushed every time.
We nearly wouldn't have been able to afford letters if we paid them back.
Look at Verloc here, making an elegant overture. He's a very rough draft of Alex Sebastian in Notorious, the Claude Rains character, who also plotted destruction, and more than that, who also loved a woman who did not return his affection. On Notorious, which was based on a work of popular fiction, Hitchcock followed his method of, quote, ruthless adaptation. As he once said, "If I like the basic idea, I just forget all about the book and start to create cinema."
But I could have sworn I saw you come in just about... Well, you were wrong. I didn't know anything
His
about...
adaptation of The Secret Agent was not ruthless, in part because its odd and macabre tone was already Hitchcockian. Here's a sample from Conrad. Verloc heard against a window pane the faint buzzing of a fly, his first fly of the year, heralding better than any number of swallows the approach of spring. To be sure, Hitchcock made changes in transferring novel to screen. For example, he took the wickedly convoluted narrative of Conrad, which flowed backward, forward, and sideways, and made it linear. No flashbacks, no flash-forwards. Moreover, he put his own distinct stamp on the humor, in both minor characters like the colorful cook, Mrs. Jones, and the bomb maker called the Professor. Finally, he changed the title of the novel since, as moviegoers knew, he had already made a picture called The Secret Agent. The novel, however, is fully recognizable in the adaptation, especially because of the movie's adoption of the novel's gloom and darkness. Conrad called the London of the novel, quote, a cruel devourer of the world's light, as it certainly becomes in Sabotage. The emptiness of these shots contrasts greatly with the London we see elsewhere in the film, which is dark and agitated like a cup of tea with the sediment stirred up. Take Plowthorpe Road, in a lively working-class neighborhood. The people, as I mentioned earlier, never stop moving, as though they were being pursued or searching for something or someone that forever eludes them. At the heart of the narrative are the Verlocs, and at the heart of the Verlocs is a malaise that the entire community may share.
It's something worse than tonight's job may happen.
What's the idea, sir? What's the point of all this wrecking?
Making trouble at home to take our minds off what's going on abroad. Same as in a crowd. One man treads on your toe.
What did Superintendent Talbot say? That Verloc and company were making trouble at home? The vagueness suggests that Talbot has just slipped us a variation of the McGuffin. More on that, too, in a minute. Here we are, believe it or not, in a field near Harrow, northwest of London. Rather than shoot on location, Hitchcock constructed a complete replica of a London street scene, with fully equipped shops, trams, buses, traffic lights, beacons, overhead railway, and hundreds of pedestrians. Okay, back to the MacGuffin. In Hitchcock, the MacGuffin was the focus of the struggle or evil-doing. It was what the bad guys had and the good guys needed to save themselves or the world. It was the atomic powder, the warplane designs, the microfilm hidden in the decorative figurine. Hitchcock rarely identified the nature of the MacGuffin. It was just something to set off the plot. Here's how Hitchcock explained it. It might be a Scottish name, MacGuffin, taken from a story about two men in a train. One man says, "What's that package up there in the baggage rack?" And the other answers, "Oh, that's a MacGuffin." The first one asks, "What's a MacGuffin?" "Well," the other man says, "it's an apparatus for trapping lions in the Scottish Highlands." The first man says, "But there are no lions in the Scottish Highlands." And the other one answers, "Well then, that's no MacGuffin." So you see, Hitchcock concluded, a MacGuffin is nothing at all. Now, one of the great set pieces in Sabotage. The surprise is it has no fast cutting and no great suspense, but the darkness and the forbidding atmosphere are ominous. Among the remarkable aspects of the scene is Hitchcock's use of the turtles. As they swim suspended in the tank, soon to be sacrificed, they seem as trapped as the cinema owner standing anchored before them. Hitchcock always tried to stay away from talking heads. Camera on one character speaking, camera on the other character responding. Too much like radio, he said. Here he avoids the cliché by showing us the back of talking heads. Their speech floats over the image, as though it too were suspended. The scene, meanwhile, adds or reinforces several pieces of exposition. Most important, we confirm that Verloc has gone into the terrorism business for pay, not for glory. We also see him express his reticence to destroy human life. Verloc has asked for his pay in pound notes. How have they been paying him, we wonder? Anyway, the London Zoo Aquarium stands in a long line of well-chosen Hitchcock locations. Hitchcock liked mundane places, ordinary places, like the forgotten motel along the old highway, or the peaceful Northern California village where birds turn killers. He often started a screenplay by asking, "What do they have in wherever?" He would then devise an important scene for that location. Before Sabotage, he had used the British Museum and the Albert Hall. The less expected the place was as a scene of violence, executed or merely planned, the better Hitchcock liked it. I keep saying Hitchcock, as though his films were his alone. Hitchcock was unique. He was unrivaled as a director of set pieces, like the Albert Hall climax of The Man Who Knew Too Much, or the explosion of the bus and the stabbing of Verloc in Sabotage. But his strength lay in visual effects rather than narrative logic. He needed harnessing, and his scenarists, usually his first and most crucial collaborators, provided them. Chief among them was his wife, Alma Reville, a petite woman who was involved with most of her husband's pictures before the early 1940s. On Sabotage, she received credit for, quote, continuity. That title no longer exists as a credit in contemporary cinema, but before the 1940s, the continuity person assured the coherence of the plot and the characters. She, and she was often female, was a script editor, a script doctor, and sometimes even a script writer. The marriage of Hitch and Alma, as their friends call them, was apparently built on mutual respect and, on Hitchcock's part, fear. Alma's opinion mattered more than anyone else's. She was not her husband's muse, his themes and grim preoccupations, came from somewhere deep inside his psyche. She was nonetheless his ballast. His pet names for her were Kitty and Madam. Her raised eyebrow could alter a shot, a scene, an entire picture. Sabotage was among her last screen credits. Ever afterwards, though, Hitchcock continued to seek out her thoughts. A haunting shot. Piccadilly Circus, its blazing electric signs, its hordes of people, its theaters and shops, all falling, along with its famous statue of Eros. We have come to expect this from Hitchcock, the destruction of life, alongside a bespectacled lad and his world-weary girlfriend, or an anarchist looking as addled as Stevie was earlier in the kitchen. But the vaunted Hitchcock touch had deep roots in cinema history. Later on, for instance, when he put Stevie on a bus next to a woman with a puppy, their lives in great jeopardy, Hitchcock shows us the lesson he learned from filmmakers D.W. Griffith and Sergei Eisenstein. Tell the story in pictures and the climax in cuts. Hitchcock himself wrote the initial treatment of Sabotage, concentrating on those scenes he would lift from the novel. What little survives of this document shows the director anticipating his picture and his cuts. But how these sketches became part of a coherent script is a story in itself. Essential to Sabotage was the British dramatist and actor Charles Bennett. In the late 1920s, Bennett had written a play called Blackmail, which Hitchcock directed, first as a silent picture, then as one of the first sound pictures in England. By 1934, Gaumont British Studios had signed Bennett and Hitchcock to a 5-picture contract. Throughout their association and beyond, Hitchcock rarely altered his method of working with his writers. Rather than develop a treatment or script, he preferred to sneak up on one. First, on coming together each day, he and his writer chatted about the latest movies and the gossip associated with the industry. Then they stopped for tea. Then, more idle conversation. Gradually, they turned to the task before them.
Oysters, caviar, smoked salmon, fried, grilled or boiled sole.
I'll have a...
Roast saddle of mutton, Kentish chicken pudding, boiled silver side, roast sirloin, chopped steaks, grilled kidneys or roast duck.
I think Stevie'd like a nice poached egg on toast. Now I'll have a mixed salad.
Here, drink this.
Ted is channeling Hitchcock, whose capacity for fine food was, well, obvious. As Ted and Winnie converse, Hitchcock or Bennett or someone has her explain her American accent. The explanation, rather than answering a question, creates others. If Stevie is Winnie's brother, and Winnie hails from the United States, why doesn't Stevie also have an American accent? What would Hitchcock say? It's only a movie. Hitchcock also said actors are cattle, but Sylvia Sidney is especially good here, and her folded arms say as much about her as her dialogue. Many scenes in Sabotage, and this is one of them, allow the actors a fair amount of freedom. In other words, Hitchcock lets the camera run for 30, 40, 60 seconds or more. In this scene, Winnie knows she cannot let herself go. Stevie needs her, and they need Verloc. Speaking of Stevie, the two shots of Ted and Winnie, especially the earlier one, appear almost dreamlike. Their length makes us forget about Stevie, even as it carves out an intimate space for Ted and Winnie.
Haven't you got some terrible secret?
Never mind about that.
What goes on after hours in that cinema of yours?
Deeds of darkness.
Does your husband go on mysterious journeys?
He does, wearing false whiskers.
Aha, that means there's another woman in his life. What's the joke?
If you only knew him. He's the quietest, most harmless, home-loving person.
Hitchcock's dissatisfaction with John Loder, expressed on several occasions, may have started with scenes like that last one. But could any other actor have brought that playful talk to life? Could even Robert Donat have done so? As noted earlier, lines like these lack sparkle. They don't fit the characters, or at least not Winnie. Her life's been constricted too long. She doesn't encourage chit-chat, and in that restaurant scene, she falls into it too easily.
What luck with Mrs. Verloc?
Did Bennett write those lines? Hitchcock later said that Bennett was, quote, essentially a writer of melodrama. Was that damning Bennett with faint praise, or just plain damning him? Around this time, Hitchcock himself was called, quote, the greatest director of screen melodrama in the world. Perhaps Hitchcock and Bennett had concocted those lines when they worked on the screenplay together during a holiday in Switzerland. Who did what remains elusive, though. Remember, 3 other writers on Sabotage were credited with so-called additional dialogue. But they did not create the Winnie and Ted romance, which did not exist in Conrad. Hitchcock or Bennett probably did, or Alma, or the co-producer of Sabotage, Ivor Montague, both of whom, incidentally, Alma and Ivor, were also on that Swiss working vacation. At the end of the day, someone deserves credit for knitting it all together. And who else but Hitchcock? Just as who else but Hitchcock could have created this.
But I can't understand, madam. One of my best songbirds. It sang all day before you purchased it. Perhaps in a few days it will settle down.
Nothing won't make it settle down. I've tried always. Whistling to it, clapping my hands, frying bacon, no use. It just sits there and makes me look silly.
Not the bird's fault, I assure you, madam.
Isn't it? I'll have my 2 and 9, please, and there's your bird back. I want a canary for company.
Perhaps I can make him sing. There now.
You sure it was him?
Listen again.
See his beak open?
Of course you did. There's a good boy. Now, don't forget, plenty of watercress, and you must whistle to him.
Me whistle? Perhaps you'd like me to sit in the cage and him do the housework.
Yes, of course. You want something from my other...
The casting and performance of the irate customer were impeccable. Ditto the casting and performances of Claire Greet as the cook, Charles Hawtrey as the bookish lad at the aquarium, and Joyce Barber as the bijou cashier, who has the spine that Winnie lacks. Ditto William Dewhurst as the professor, whose bald head and droll comments about murder may remind us of someone behind the camera. In the small kitchen are 2 more good actors, the child and the actress who plays her sullen mother. As throughout Conrad, you can almost taste the misery here. The ages of the professor, his daughter, and her daughter roughly parallel those of Verloc, Winnie, and Stevie. Like the Verlocs, the professor and his family live and work in the same building. Like the Verlocs, members of the household have a fragile bond. In fact, the professor earlier introduced his daughter to Verloc as though she were a specimen in an exhibit, my daughter. And finally, like the Verlocs, the head of the household puts the youngest in jeopardy, in the professor's case, by leaving his explosives accessible to others. His daughter, played by Martita Hunt, rubs and rubs and rubs the counter like a domesticated Lady Macbeth. She wants to erase 2 moral stains, hers, which resulted in the birth of her child out of wedlock, and her father's, which will result in the deaths of children and adults. She rubs and rubs, however, because the stains are indelible. We all bear crosses, as the professor says, exceedingly heavy ones, too. Even the professor bears the crosses of age, or so he says, and of his daughter's contempt. Meanwhile, his granddaughter, or someone, has placed one of her dolls on a reachable shelf of a cabinet. Maybe the doll climbed up there by herself, hoping to flee the chronic angers of this house. Hitchcock makes the most of the moment. He strikes terror in the terrorist, and does so using an extraordinary economy of means. Economy was a Hitchcock trademark, seen in the virtuosity of his movies, and touted by him in his personal publicity. That, too, is a story in itself. Suffice to say here that by 1936, when he directed Sabotage, Hitchcock was already working very hard to establish himself as an auteur, the French word for author, and in the 1960s, the name for those picture makers who put their personal stamp on their work. Hitchcock courted the press. He welcomed reporters to his home and his sets, and the seduction worked. During the 1930s, the British critic Caroline Lejeune wrote that, quote, "Hitch's genius is for draftsmanship. He is an instinctive visualizer." Lejeune was an unabashed Hitchcock fan and went on to refer to his film scripts as, quote, "minor works of art with every shot blocked on the margin of the page in rough design." In other words, the scripts were, quote, minor, whereas their realization was, quote, genius. Just the right hobby to convey the desire for escape. Here, Sylvia Sidney plays Winnie Verloc, and Winnie Verloc plays the contented wife. In early 1936, producer Michael Balkin had gone to Hollywood on a scouting trip and signed a contract with Sidney. She was more actress than front-rank star, but she was bankable. She was also, as things turned out, uneasy with both Hitchcock and her co-star. Oscar Homolka, 12 years her senior, was, she said, very old school, very old-fashioned about his acting. I had a hard time with that.
Sailing boats is fun. I like it. But Ted knows about all sorts of things.
Gangsters and burglars and everything.
How does he know?
He reads about them. He says gangsters are not nearly so frightening as you'd think. Some of them are quite ordinary looking, like you and me and Mr. Verloc. Perhaps he's right. After all, if gangsters looked like gangsters, the police would soon get after them, wouldn't they, I mean?
That last high-angle shot of Verloc, was it from Winnie's mental point of view to determine if her husband suspects something so obvious that even Stevie has noticed it? Or was it to show us that Verloc, beneath his beetle brows, has a secret far worse than Winnie's? For the first time in the picture, up close and personal, we saw the full menace of Carl Anton Verloc. Meanwhile, the gang of four has arrived. The man who leaves Winnie so pensive was London-born actor Peter Bull. Many years later, he was the Russian ambassador in Dr. Strangelove.
Maybe I won't be bothering you anymore again after tonight.
Back to Sylvia Sidney for a moment. Before Sabotage, Sidney was a Paramount star in the 1930s. There, she played a series of victims, generally from the working class. Her exotic face bore traces of her Russian heritage and, maybe, points further east. Her eyes were communicative, as though they had seen a lot, and much of it unpleasant. Hitchcock told French director François Truffaut that, quote, "I found it rather difficult to get any shading into Sylvia Sidney's face, yet on the other hand, she had a nice understatement." In Sabotage, she was adept at projecting anguish and vulnerability. While working under Hitchcock, she may have felt those emotions personally. Hitchcock liked things, she said. He was always shooting things, hands, knives, birds. He didn't seem too interested in people. True or not, Hitchcock, as noted, was a great collector of gossip and must have known that Sidney had come to England, leaving behind 2 marriages in disarray. First, her own to publisher Bennett Cerf, and second, the marriage of Paramount executive B.P. Schulberg, who had fallen in love with her. Whether Hitchcock mentioned these seems doubtful, but again, the anguish and vulnerability of Winnie Verloc may have proceeded from Sidney herself. Austrian-born Oscar Homolka, a veteran of the First World War, had fled the Nazis and on his way to the United States stopped in England. He had a round, hard face that somehow seemed better suited to villains or spies, in part because his accent, his bearing, and those thick eyebrows made him look heavier and more alien than he was. As critic David Thompson says, Homolka spent most of his time living up to English-speaking stereotypes of the cruel, menacing, or stupid, mumbling German.
I don't see anything against it.
An interesting fact about the thriller Sextet, especially in this scene inhabited by several foreign accents, is its evocation of the period. The British were increasingly alarmed by the prospect of Germany under Adolf Hitler, and Hitchcock embodied that fear in his pictures. In The Man Who Knew Too Much, he created a gang of spies, chief among them the Hungarian-born Peter Lorre, who had strong associations with German films. In The 39 Steps, which was made as Hitler was consolidating his power, Hitchcock alluded even more directly to the rearming of Germany. The Secret Agent, the Hitchcock movie, was pointedly anti-German, even though it was set in the First World War. Finally, in Sabotage, Hitchcock showed us designs that aliens like Verloc had on the home front. Maybe that's why the British censors were far less worried than their American counterparts about the word hell, which is not used once, but twice in Sabotage. Hitchcock borrowed from Conrad the notion of an international conspiracy of terrorists, though he made the would-be conspirators, at least in this scene, seem less like bound-for-hell terrorists, excuse the expression, than safecrackers or heist planners. Perhaps they, like Verloc, are mercenaries. Or perhaps Hitchcock just wanted them to be his terrorists instead of Conrad's, though that actually encouraged comparisons of novel and film, which Hitchcock disliked. Once upon a time, he said, 2 junkyard goats were chewing on film tins like those that Stevie will carry across London. You know, one ruminating goat says to the other, I think the book was better than the movie. Earlier, I mentioned montage, the art of rapidly cutting images together in order to mimic the intensity of the action. We associate Hitchcock with montage, but look at this scene.
Yesterday, at Simpson's, when you had lunch with that fellow.
Was it Ted, you mean?
I remember what he said to you. Did he ask you any questions about yourself? About me?
None that I can think of. Why?
Because he's a detective from Scotland Yard. That's why. Spying on us. On me. Through you.
But why should he? What is there to find out?
I'm all right. It must be one of those fellows who came here tonight.
But you said he was spying on you.
No, not on me. This place, I meant.
But if he has anything against anybody, why didn't he come straight to you? You'd help him. I'll talk to Mr. Detective Ted.
No, I'll speak to him myself.
Whenever Hitchcock films characters in profile, especially women, he conveys their apprehension. Now, as we saw before, in the scene of Ted and Winnie in the restaurant, Sabotage does allow scenes to breathe uncut. But unlike that shot at Simpson's, which created an intimacy between the characters, the shot in the cramped ticket booth, like this shot of more than 30 seconds, displays the kind of claustrophobia that became part of Hitchcock's signature. Hitchcock was not married to montage. In fact, in the 1940s, he would increasingly use long-duration shots. He took the technique to its natural end in Rope, a movie whose shots run 8 minutes and longer. Even when a picture like Lifeboat was notable for neither its continuity shots nor its montage, it illustrated his attention to confined spaces. Another profile, another apprehensive character. A powerful use of shot, countershot, despite that continuity blip, perhaps in the original release, perhaps not. Hitchcock always gave value for money, not least in the suspenseful sequence that begins here. In 1936, when Sabotage entered the theaters for the first time, most audiences could not easily have predicted an explosion in Piccadilly Circus or Westminster, especially on a day that celebrates both order and the long, proud history of London. In the early 1940s, though, when theaters revived Sabotage, the explosion must have seemed not only small-scale, but a grim foreshadowing of the Blitz. In the still recent aftermath of the fall of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001, no one watching Sabotage can help remarking on its astonishing currency. The currency, though, was there from the beginning, in the novel, which now seems even more prescient than the movie does. In Conrad's The Secret Agent, the professor character has the courage of his lethal convictions. He specializes in explosives and dreams of a detonation device that, quote, would adjust itself to all conditions and even to unexpected changes of conditions. A really intelligent detonator. Interestingly, Conrad makes the professor a so-called suicide bomber. As the police know, the professor straps the bomb to himself when he goes out. The police also know that approaching him may cause him to detonate the bomb, which would destroy him and everything around him. The ending of Sabotage borrows the device of the suicide bomber, but doesn't spell things out. The end, likewise, does not show the destruction. Maybe the bus explosion was enough. Stevie has skipped off to see his new birds. Earlier, we saw Stevie feeding the pigeons before joining Ted for lunch at the restaurant, and also saw the mute canary the irate customer return to the pet shop. Like that woman and Hitchcock himself, these people were drawn to birds. But birds can destroy, and they do, in mythology, in traditional oral and written narratives, and even in cartoons, as the Disney Silly Symphonies coming up will show. Meanwhile, we have entered another of Hitchcock's long-duration shots. This one lasts around 90 seconds. But the camera doesn't stand still. It moves from close-ups to alternately wide or tight two-shots. In its last 40 or so seconds, with Winnie in one of the theater seats, Ted builds his case against Verloc.
Well, my husband hasn't anything to do with Sabotage.
He told me that night he'd been in all the evening. That wasn't true. I saw him come back with my own eyes.
I don't believe it.
You're making things very difficult.
Emotionally and physically uncomfortable, Winnie has to bend her neck around. And of course she's in profile. Verloc wears a dark hat and dark overcoat. Keeping matters schematic, Ted wears a light-colored overcoat. Here's Verloc reminding us that Sabotage is a spy story. Under other circumstances, Verloc might have harbored suspicions about his wife and Ted. Now he's too preoccupied. Those simple porcelain figurines. Someone put them there, a set decorator probably, and Hitchcock handily uses them and the framed pictures to establish the normalness of the Verloc flat. Normal, but a cage nonetheless. A witty touch here, not the painted backdrop, but the hat bobbing along the garden wall. Spies are everywhere. Speaking of making things difficult, Sylvia Sidney needed a great deal of reassurance, and Hitchcock's was not enough. Producer Montague said later that she was apprehensive about her performance, especially since she could not foresee how Hitchcock planned to cut together her scenes. Hold on a second. While Verloc, the actor, uses as a prop a movie trade paper. If he read it more closely, the bijou might not be in the red. Back to Sidney. Ironically, she said nothing about the many long-duration shots in which she, more than Hitchcock, controlled her performance. Meanwhile, Hitchcock had other troubles. He had wanted Stevie to cross London on a tram rather than a bus. Too costly, Montague said. Hitchcock argued that American audiences associated trams, not buses, with London. Montague won the battle, then lost the war. He soon asked to be taken off the picture because he had lost Hitchcock's confidence. We're 30 or so seconds into another of those long-running shots, which will last almost 60 more seconds. Eisenstein argued that shots like these perverted the medium. Yes, long-running shots captured what Eisenstein called actual man. The actor was there, in real space, in real time, immune from the manipulations and deceptions that editing made possible. But Eisenstein also wrote that he considered the long-duration shot to be, quote, utterly unfilmic. Hitchcock did not wholly disagree with Eisenstein regarding the power of montage. As a number of critics have pointed out, the cut distinguishes cinema from all other media. But Hitchcock understood that montage and the continuity shot could complement one another. Accordingly, he used long-duration shots not only to privilege the actors, but to provide a strong contrast to the montage sequences that depict moments of high action. As he knew, the meticulously edited deaths of Stevie and later Verloc would have even more power because many other effective moments in the film were captured with a long running of the camera. The long-running shot accented the mise-en-scène, that is, such things as composition, lighting, performance, setting, and even wardrobe and set decoration. In 1937, Hitchcock said, quote, "I have tried lately to get interiors with a real lower-middle-class atmosphere. For instance, the Verloc's living room in Sabotage. But there's always a certain risk in giving your audience humdrum truth." The humdrum suited the Verlocs. It provided a clue to the sort of genteel life they aspired to, and that served as cover for a terrorist. One of the benefits of working in Hollywood, as Hitchcock expected, would be its grander sets. But one of the grace notes of the thriller sextet is the verisimilitude of its sets and its characters' costumes. Another of Hitchcock's long-running shots, one that flirts with but steers clear of having Verloc name his home country. The detective and the accused, and he has become the accused, will occupy each side of the frame. The lawman seems relaxed. Notice his posture. And the outlaw will fidget. Notice his posture.
About yourself, Mr. Verloc, when did you first...
Verloc does a good job of rubbing his hands as though they had explosives on them. Winnie aligns her body with Ted's, as though she too accuses Verloc. When Ted asks Verloc to write, "I, Carl Anton Verloc," is he asking for a confession or a last will and testament? The stasis of that well-composed shot of Verloc, his fidgeting notwithstanding, lays the groundwork for this shot, which Hitchcock makes dynamic not only by cutting to Stevie, but by cutting to him in motion.
The process of decay, inevitable in all human organisms. But decay can be arrested, instantaneously arrested. And by what? Copper. Yes, exactly. But if I may say so, by rather more than one copper, by a few coppers. I have here in my hand a tube of that remarkable preparation, salvodont, derived from two Greek words, salvo no more and dont toothache. 6pence for the small tube and a shilling for the large tube containing 4 times as much. Now let me give you just a little demonstration. Now if somebody...
Stevie now falls victim to the huckster and the crowd that sweep him into the demonstration chair. His cap. Does the B signify his school or an athletic team he follows? Either way, it gives him an identity beyond his family and adds more flesh to his character. Both make his impending death even more touching.
Then we pick up the toothbrush and we squeeze some of the solvent.
Notice that the huckster has a miracle product that will arrest decay. No small matter in this dark film. Notice, too, if these sorts of things interest you, the knot in Stevie's tie throughout this long sequence. It's white, then black and white. Obviously, the filming took place over several periods of time.
But with salvodont, that's the happy medium. Neither too strong nor too weak. It performs the functions that nature forgot. It cleanses the teeth, refreshes the mouth, and removes all traces of halitosis. What?
Halitosis, a Madison Avenue word, or its London equivalent, from the Latin halitus.
Don't be afraid. There you are. Better now. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you will observe that I have, unfortunately, disarranged...
Nice touch. Stevie wiping his mouth on his tie. Another nice touch, the language lesson that the huckster passes along at no extra cost. Stevie looks miserable in this scene, and the actor Desmond Tester wrings every ounce of embarrassment from the character. And thanks to Hitchcock, Tester knew what it was like to be laughed at.
Appearance of patent leather to the human fetch. You are now groomed to stardom, as they say.
That was an inside joke. In Hollywood, and perhaps in England, the studios rarely took would-be stars as they were. So commonplace were dental work and other enhancements for these actors that David Selznick, when he signed Ingrid Bergman, trumpeted the fact that she required almost no makeup or reconstruction. Stevie's workover, meanwhile, gets at another of the dark themes in Sabotage, the dissatisfaction that festers in crowds of people in contemporary London. What do they have in London? Here's Hitchcock's answer: one of the greatest and oldest English spectacles. The Westminster, you see, is a canvas backdrop, an obvious one too, but not unusually so for the period. The people, unlike the backdrop, are not fabricated but the real thing, out for a good time. The occasion celebrates the inauguration of the new Lord Mayor of London. Originally, he sailed down the Thames, and some allege that the word float originated with the practice. By the 1930s, he proceeded by golden coach to Westminster to swear allegiance to the crown. The English censors were apparently unconcerned about the threat that Stevie posed, though their American counterparts were always concerned, for real, that movies could give people ideas. Hitler already had them, and on display during the real 1936 procession was a tribute to the rise and gradual development of the Navy and Army. The horses, the soldiers, the music, the rifles, quite a celebration. Hitchcock also gives us a lesson in what might be called kid time, the way that time melts for children like Stevie. Those double superimpositions of the gears of the bomb and the sweeping hand of the clock tend to date the film, but they're not ineffective. Shall we watch a bit of the parade? A throng of Londoners elbow and shout their way through another crowd scene. Stevie knows where he's going, but most of the other people seem to move in all directions at once. In other words, as Stevie runs to catch the bus, the order of the procession has given way to a disorder that foreshadows what will follow. In a shot 20 seconds long, the conductor bars his young passenger from boarding because, as Verloc has already explained, the nitrate film stock is highly flammable. Was the greengrocer who called one of Verloc's movies a bit too hot thinking of this one? Frederick Piper plays the bus conductor. He was a regular in Hitchcock's films. Like Ted earlier, the conductor here calls Stevie Bartholomew the Strangler. In other words, a murderer. But the conductor relented, and Stevie took his seat as Hitchcock and the editor of record, Charles Friend, began to tell his story in the powerful bits and pieces of montage. Among the bits and pieces are the close-ups of the bomb, which Hitchcock composed and shot from different angles. He did so, he said, to animate the bomb. If I'd shown it constantly from the same angle, the public would have become used to the package. Oh, well, it's only a package after all. But what I was saying was, be careful. Watch out. Hitchcock uses other bits and pieces to create, in all, a 38-shot sequence. The content intensifies the vulnerability of the female passenger, Stevie, and the puppy, an almost shameless touch. Meanwhile, the cutting allows Hitchcock to orchestrate not only the action, but also the viewer. He shows us the scene, in other words, from Stevie's perspective and from an objective perspective. The effect is powerful. Hitchcock, the narrator, foreshadows the loss of human life, even as Hitchcock, the orchestrator of the carefully composed and edited images, renders us helpless to stop it. When finally the bus explodes, we understand the reason for the teeming masses of people throughout Sabotage. The buses, the cars, the trucks, and the people who fill them at all hours not only crowd but clog the streets. London restricts movement, and when the bus slows down before it can reach Piccadilly Circus, and as the tick-tock music becomes increasingly insistent, the people inside the bus, along with the people in the stall traffic around them, seem, again, like so many caged birds. The birds sing all right, and their song's a dirge. Until its climax, the bus sequence illustrates a pet Hitchcock theory. Suppose that three men are sitting in a room in which a ticking bomb has been planted, Hitchcock explained. It is going to go off in 10 minutes. The audience does not know it is there, and the men do not know it is there either. So they go on talking inanely of the weather or yesterday's baseball game. After 10 minutes of desultory conversation, the bomb goes off. What is the result? The unsuspecting audience gets a surprise. One surprise. That's all. Hitchcock paused, then continued. Suppose the story were told differently. This time, while the men still do not know the bomb is there, the audience does know. The men still talk inanities, but now the most banal thing they say is charged with excitement. The audience wants them to get out of the room, but they talk on. And when one finally says, "Let's leave," the entire audience is praying for them to do so. But another man says, "No, wait a minute. I want to finish my coffee." And the audience groans inwardly and yearns for them to leave. This is suspense. No less effective than the suspense, however, is what Hitchcock shows us during the aftermath of the explosion. The topicality of these searing images stuns us. The footage seems as fresh as today's cable news. And for some in 1936, a little too fresh and too current. In the aftermath of Sabotage, Hitchcock paid for his willful destruction of Stevie, as well as his alarming a group of persons or inspiring public uneasiness. Moviegoers sent Hitchcock letters of outrage. Brazil banned Sabotage as an incitement to terrorism and a threat to public order. Carolyn Lejeune, that most devoted of Hitchcock critics, dressed him down not only in person, but in print. Hitchcock said that the reaction to Sabotage taught him something fundamental about his 3 men and a bomb theory. The bomb, or whatever lethal device stands in for it, must never detonate, or at least not detonate and harm an innocent character. But elsewhere, Hitchcock also said that it wasn't Stevie's age or his innocence that caused the backlash. Instead, the audience had gotten worked up, and the movie failed to provide the needed relief. Verloc said it best, talking to Winnie in their first scene together, quote, "It doesn't pay to antagonize the public." In later movies, the chastened Hitchcock would use a metaphorical bomb. In Rope, it would be a dead man in a trunk in a New York City living room. In Suspicion, and again in Spellbound, it would be, apparently, a glass of milk. In Sabotage, however, the deaths of Stevie and others do reinforce a common Hitchcock theme, the notion that we have limited free will, and that fate, which governs our existence, has a cosmic sense of humor. Other themes surface in Sabotage and resonate thereafter in British and American Hitchcock productions. Sabotage touches on the dead haunting the living, as do Rebecca, Vertigo, and even The Trouble with Harry. Sabotage also treats the intermingling of innocence and guilt, as does Notorious, and Ted embodies the theme of love versus duty, as does Doris Day in The Man Who Knew Too Much, and to some extent James Stewart in Vertigo. Other themes? The darkness at the heart of the middle-class home in Sabotage and Shadow of a Doubt, and the consequences of crosses borne too long in Sabotage, Psycho, and Marnie. Together, they attest to the richness of Hitchcock. In the scenes now through the end of the picture, Hitchcock dramatizes the hopelessness that Stevie's death engenders. Verloc has a growling operatic aria here, the kind that evil bass baritones sing before they die. Now, within the scene, Hitchcock contrasts movement and stasis. Verloc prowls, and Sylvia Sidney is motionless, except for her shallow, rapid breathing. In the Conrad novel, a policeman told the Verlocs that after Stevie died, quote, they had to fetch a shovel to gather him up. Hitchcock's Winnie was spared that, but not the cruel lecture from her husband, who manages to remind her of both Stevie and his clumsiness. Hitchcock sandwiches Verloc between objects in foreground and background. He also traps him in a camera angle that could not be more ironic. Winnie has appreciated her husband, if not loved him. Now, as she looks up at him, she could not hate him more.
I know how you feel.
Hitchcock calls shots like these big heads. They remind us of why Conrad called his novel The Story of Winnie Verloc. We see what Winnie sees and how Winnie sees. Verloc diminished in the frame. Verloc comes toward Winnie, kneels as a supplicant, and takes exactly the wrong tact to restore him to his grieving wife.
Listen, it's done now. And there's the future. Perhaps, I don't know.
The shot resolves with the birds in bright light and Verloc in shadow, dominated by almost everything else in the frame. That pullback of the camera further isolated the character. As for Winnie, she must escape or go mad, or both. Now, who killed Cock Robin? As far as I can tell, Hitchcock did not make one of his cameo appearances in Sabotage, unless you count the animated cartoon, Cock Robin. Hitchcock's school chums called him Cocky, and in a way that Mae West would have appreciated, Hitchcock also liked to pun on the word cock. We see only the first several minutes of Cock Robin. The complete version turns into a cops and robbers story, and then a trial with the apparent corpse laid out in the courtroom. Along the way, there are gay and racial stereotypes and plenty of brutality. When I was preparing this commentary, I found Cock Robin in color on the internet. Hitchcock must have loved it, and not just because most of the characters were birds. He admired Disney because, he said, when Uncle Walt did not like an actor, he could simply trash him. The use of the Silly Symphonies cartoon here, especially the violence and the laughter of the crowd, underscores what Winnie has lost, and maybe forever, both Stevie and the gift of laughter. Winnie enters, determined to get on with life or to kill her husband. Hard to know. Verloc does himself no favors by having already seated himself at the table, his appetite intact. As Verloc nibbles and complains, Hitchcock begins a set of shot-countershots almost at eye level with the tabletop. The dishes and cutlery along the bottom of the composition add heaviness to the visuals and their content. Then a skillful move, from the full shot to a close-up and tilt down that links her head to her hands. Through camera movement, in other words, we see her thoughts even as they occur. The return of the wider shot shows Winnie repelling the thought or attempting to, though the bottom-heavy composition still keeps the knife in play. Her motion is sped up in anticipation of the cutting speeding up. A series of relayed glances ends in that empty chair from Winnie's point of view. The hard formality of the table setting, with its perfectly aligned silverware, makes Stevie's absence all the more acute. Hitchcock closely mics the clatter of the serving pieces as a minor shock effect. As her right hand covers her left, the hand with her glinting wedding band, the camera has moved in. Verloc's the man who knows too much, and now must act on it. Notice that Winnie has not spoken during this scene. Notice, too, that throughout the sequence, she and her husband have occupied separate frames. As Verloc slowly moves toward Winnie, he comes so close to the camera that, according to Hitchcock, audiences feel they must move back to make room for him. Now we see him in profile. What are his thoughts? To remove the knife? To embrace his wife and, again, to abase himself before her? United at last. Another tilt down, and tilt up, and the frame tightens. What, we wonder, are the hands doing? The cut to the close-up shows us. Did Winnie plunge the knife into her husband, or did he fall on it? Her reaching out for him when he falls may suggest a final tribute to their marriage, or a regret for what has happened, or, ironically, an involuntary action. Here, Hitchcock paints a still life, whimsically titled, perhaps, The Corpse in the Parlor. The director reduces Verloc to a pair of large shoes surrounded by tokens of his lower middle-class life, not least his widow. Like Sabotage overall, the image connotes loss, despair, and desolation. In 1938, Hitchcock explained that he could not have shot the death of Verloc in long duration. As he said, it had to be made up of these little pieces. But after using cutting to maximum effect, Hitchcock now captures Winnie and Ted in a single running of the camera, more than 90 seconds long. Again, the absence of cutting throws the weight of the narrative on the actors. John Loder's protestations of love here may not win him honors in the pantheon of cinema acting, but as I mentioned earlier, the role doesn't fit him particularly well. The movie survives, of course. Still, a satisfactory rather than accomplished performance reflected not only on the actor, but also Hitchcock. For another director, the weakness would not have mattered much, but Hitchcock, even before he started Sabotage, aspired to work in Hollywood. He found America appealing for several reasons. Compared to their American counterparts, English studios were small, their stars were provincial, and their income streams were erratic. English executives were also slow to recognize Hitchcock's value. In 1934, they sold The Man Who Knew Too Much to a major cinema chain for very little money and as the second feature on a double bill. Hitchcock believed that Hollywood knew how to make and sell pictures, but he had also wanted to go west for one additional and surprising reason. Remember the street he constructed on the outskirts of London? One night, filming there came to a halt. The extras took shelter, the crew covered cameras and microphone, the producers anxiously paced, and Hitchcock said he stood muffled up and chilled to the marrow in a temporary shelter. Tempers flared as the budget clock ticked like a bomb in a film canister. And why? Because it was raining, pouring, and for 3 nights running. As the director told the New York Times, the greatest difficulty we have in making films in England is to combat the climate. People, and more people, and more people. We saw them pell-mell from Winnie's point of view, and they almost seemed to be imagined by Winnie, the tract-waving evangelist urging her to repent and believe, the crowd of children mocking her with their vitality, the woman supported by police, under arrest or in shock, and the worst image of all, Stevie. As a chief detective in the Conrad novel says, the law offender and the police officer have the same mind and instincts. They also have a working knowledge of each other's methods and of the routine of their respective trades. In this scene, Ted will forsake his duty and put his outlaw instincts to work.
I know the facts, but no one else does. What chance would you stand with the judge and jury?
I don't care anymore.
You're telling me you've nothing more to live for, is that it?
This scene mixes shot, counter-shot editing with shots long in duration. a method that Hitchcock has used throughout Sabotage. But even as Ted concocts, in retrospect, the perfect crime, Hitchcock tosses a spanner in the works.
Weekend tickets. The train leaves at 9.
You have to admire the elegant crisscrossed reversals here. First, a parent, Verloc, sends a child to his death. Then, a child, the fed-up daughter, sends her parent to his death. Both deaths are unexpected, and in the case of the professor and to some extent Stevie, they could even be called overdue. In the novel, the clumsy Stevie lost his job as an errand boy because he was so addle-headed. In the movie, of course, he almost set fire to the Verloc kitchen. Most important, that scene we just saw with the professor embodies the theme of shame, unusual in Hitchcock. The daughter talks about it, surprising us. Winnie feels and talks about it. Verloc seems to lack it, as we gradually come to see, and his absence of shame contributes to our almost rooting for Winnie when she picks up the carving knife for the first time.
Please, Van, what's our number?
UDC 4768.
The law pursues the law offender, as Hitchcock begins to create here a mini-documentary about police procedures and pursuits. Hitchcock has now pricked our curiosity about what will happen to the romantic couple next. Will they flee to Paris? Will her conscience demand she confess?
I'm all right.
The fact that she kisses him offers a hint. But the setting and the circumstances make this among the more dark endings in Hitchcock.
Whatever happened?
As we come to the end of Sabotage and reflect on what has happened, we once more appreciate the moral complexity of the picture. Consider the number of pretenders on screen. Ted poses as a greengrocer, Verloc as a small businessman, the professor as a seller of songbirds, and even Winnie as a faithful wife. The notion of feigned identity is so widespread that even Stevie recognizes and comments on it. As he said to Winnie, gangsters are, quote, quite ordinary looking, like you or me or Mr. Verloc. People, in other words, are not always as they appear. More broadly, these feigned identities suggest dissatisfaction with what life offers, from poorly cooked green cabbage to a meager existence inside a home housed in a cinema. Longing can drive a person to murder and to cover up murder, as Hitchcock will explore again and again in America, in mid-period works like Psycho and late ones like Frenzy. In Great Britain, novelist and film critic Graham Greene, not always fond of Hitchcock, wrote that in Sabotage, for the first time, Hitchcock has really come off. Meanwhile, the trade paper Kine Weekly praised Sabotage for its class, which seems like faint praise, then assured theater owners that the picture offered hearty melodrama of universal appeal. The United States trade paper Variety was a little cooler. Sabotage was, quote, an intimate character study of a thick-skulled, brutal criminal. The audience wanted Scotland Yard sleuthing to develop, but when it doesn't, the film disappoints. Such reviews would not help Hitchcock garner Hollywood offers. On opening day, however, the New York Times, in a wildly favorable review, calls Sabotage Mr. Hitchcock's picture and a valuable one. In the States, movie executives believed, and pollster George Gallup confirmed it, that women rather than men made the decision to go out to the pictures and also chose which one. Hitchcock admits as much in the script of Sabotage. Ted hates pictures with, quote, love stuff. But Verloc, the theater owner, responds that, quote, the women like it, though. That may explain why American distributors gave Sabotage a new title, The Woman Alone. Sabotage opened at New York City's Roxy Theater on February 26, 1937. The Roxy, with over 5,000 seats, generally booked domestic films, not British ones. But the distributors apparently thought that Sylvia Sidney could put bodies in the seats. In advertisements for Sabotage in New York, she was billed at 100% of title. In other words, her name and the title of the picture were in the same size type. Hitchcock had billing too, at about 20% of title.
He's dead.
The crush of people, hinting at desires and the loneliness beneath them. People in motion, in pursuit of impossible dreams. People like the customers at the Bijou. People, maybe, like us. Conrad called his novel, quote, an honorable failure. Hitchcock, on the other hand, was pleased with his adaptation. So pleased that he said he wanted to make another picture about Sabotage on location in the Glasgow dockyards. No wonder. Sabotage had allowed him to continue to explore the power of cutting, and not cutting, in moving the action forward, and even, quote, showing the audience what was passing in a character's mind without exaggerating facial expression. The audience must also have been pleased. Sabotage played for a week at the Mammoth Roxy Theater, then moved on to smaller New York houses in succeeding months. During World War II, it surfaced again, this time with the title, I Married a Murderer. Earlier in the picture, Ted defined an act as any activity activated by actual action. As one critic has pointed out, the acts in Sabotage, joking aside, leave the actors questioning their responsibilities for their actions. Were they culpable? Should they take responsibility? Or like Winnie in the final moments of Sabotage, will they simply fade into the dark? Perhaps we need to see the picture again. For now, I'm Leonard Leff. Thanks for listening.